Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and tonight we're going to update you on the events that were happening in the run-up to the Battle of Worcester that was fought on the 3rd of September 1651. So we're now up to August the 27th, so we're almost into the time of, for example, the final preparations and then the eve of the battle, basically. So what was going on? Well, last night, in theory, there was two royalist musters in the city of Worcester, and we know this because it was very well recorded. In other words, Charles informed everyone within the city and also in the county with these letters that were going out. Remember, the last letters that went out were letters demanding that the people of Worcestershire come to the city to defend or restore the defences in their county town. Well, the interesting thing is the letters went out and it was ordering that the people of Worcestershire were to rally to the royalist cause, the old cause as such, really. And what we do know is it wasn't very well attended. There was actually two musters, as I said. The first one was very disappointing, and then when the second one came along last night, it too was not that great. Charles expected a huge amount of support from Worcester. After all, it was involved in the first phase of the Civil War and was one of the last cities to hold out. But what Charles didn't realise, it was the garrison that was very loyal, really. They're getting paid at the end of the day. But the citizens of Worcester were mainly traders, people that were involved in the wool industry, and they really knew that war would cause devastation, death and destruction. So really, we may have been coined the royalist city, but actually Worcester people, the true people of Worcester, try to really stay out of it. There is actually a quote, because in the end Charles did manage to get 23 members of the gentry to sign up to the cause. Now, this doesn't mean they turned up in person. This just meant that they sent word that they would support Charles on the day of the battle. 23 members of the gentry. Interesting fact about those, most of those were people that had lost land after the city fell in 1646, for example. The well-known royalists in the area, basically, those that had raised troops for Charles. There was 140 men that had actually put their name down. And what's interesting is after the battle, we do know that most of the people on the list actually stated, one, that they were not involved in the battle. They actually went away, they stayed away. Some people actually stated that they were not even in the county at the time the battle took place, so their name may have been on the list, but they did not get involved. And several of them actually stated that they went over to the Parliament cause the night before the battle. So we have to take this with a pinch of salt. This is really a declaration of loyalty. So 23 members of the gentry and about 140 citizens, men of the county, basically. But Clarendon, and remember, he wrote the history of the Civil War, and I'm fortunate enough to have every volume of that amazing work. Of writing accounts, basically. He actually says in there, even the well-affected gentry simply chose to remain at home. They just did not want to get involved in this cause that is not really going to go anywhere. So there were these two musters. Failed musters is what we call them today. Charles was that desperate, he went to the prison in Worcester, which at the time was the old castle, or on the site of the old castle, and he actually released prisoners from there if they declared loyalty. Now, we do know some of the people locked up in there were royalists that were locked up in there by the parliamentarian militia when they knew the Scots were turning up in the county. So Charles was a very desperate person, but he still had backup, because what you have to remember is up in the north of Britain there was the Earl of Derby, who promised Charles he would raise a huge army in Catholic Lancashire and also into Shropshire and the northern reaches into Worcestershire, really, which at the time was known to be quite an area for Catholics really, and Charles was hoping that they would flock to the cause. The Earl of Derby at one point promised at least 5 or maybe even 10,000 royalist Englishmen. So hopefully they will turn up. Now, if you look back at an earlier video, you will know that only 30 of them, including the Earl of Derby, has actually survived the Battle of Wigan Lane. Look back through the playlist, look it up. Sadly, Charles has no knowledge that this battle has actually took place. So all these troops that Charles is reliant on are not going to turn up at all. So Charles is actually in a very, very dangerous situation. Basically, he has got an army, a Scottish army of around about 12,000 Scots. Some people actually say 15,000. It's more likely to be 12,000 in total. And he's reliant on the Earl of Derby coming, but he will turn up, but not with a big army. And what you have to remember is Oliver Cromwell is mustering every man in Britain, technically, or it would have felt like it at the time. Cromwell had actually brought together about 30,000 men in his field army, which was snaking across from Nottinghamshire, really, from the north of just outside the county, North Midlands area. And remember, most of those had actually came all the way from Leith or even Perth up in Scotland. So they had covered a huge distance, just like the Royalist Army. They were footsore, they were tired, and most of their clothing had worn out also. But Cromwell had also raised the militias, including the Worcestershire militia, that fought this rearguard action in Ombersley all the way back to the city gates. And they were all starting to muster as well. So he would have had at least a further, let's say, 10,000 or 12,000 militiamen as well. So if Cromwell weirdly loses the Battle of Worcester with his 30,000 strong army, then within hours they could muster yet another army to fight Charles again. So to be fair, without spoiling the story, let's just say Charles doesn't really stand a chance in this battle. Now, I've got a map here of Worcestershire, and this is a famous one. It's not the original, even though it looks like it. This is the famous John Speed map of Worcestershire, made in 1610. Now, Speed did lots and lots of maps. He mapped most of Britain, if not all of Britain actually, and he did them on a county basis. And these are readily available either online or you can get them in museum shops. And it just goes to show how small Worcestershire actually was. And you have to remember, there are some places that are no longer in Worcestershire. Some of them are now, for example, in Warwickshire or even into West Midlands, into the Birmingham area. But you will notice all the waterways, and this is quite strategic during the Civil War and also later on in the Second World War. But in the corner of the Speed maps, you usually get a picture of the county town. And this in the corner shows Worcester City really as it was at the start of the 17th century. You have to remember, if you think back to the video we did on Ronkswood Meadow, there had been a large amount of earthworks added to the medieval defences that was created really during the Siege of Worcester briefly in 1643, but more so in the big siege of 1646. Now, the Worcester militia did try and level most of those defences. Now, they had been partially levelled in 1646 when the city fell. And when the Worcester militia withdrew from the city, they tried to demolish what was left, basically. But remember, letters went out for everyone in the county to start the building or restoration of those defences. So there's a mad rush in Worcester, if you'd gone there in 1651 today, of people digging and moving earth around, even building barricades as well, because you have to remember some of the gates were actually barricaded shut. Now, instead of trying to view the Speed map, which is relatively tiny, I've decided to bring forward my whiteboard again, and I will point out a few things on this map which is worth having a look at. Now, Right at the top here, I've circled Bewdley, and the reason why I've circled Bewdley at the top there is very simply the parliamentarians, in other words, the advance party of the New Model Army, today on the 27th of August, had actually entered Bewdley at the top there. And what they decided to do is dismantle some of the arches on that bridge. So that bridge is technically unpassable. And if you do want to drop some planks in place to cross that bridge, you've got some parliamentarians sat there that's going to stop you. So that is the north, not quite the north of the county, but it is north of the city of Worcester basically, and it's upstream on the River Severn. Now that's important, but as we come down, we've got the route that the Scots had taken. So Kidderminster, Hartlebury, and then remember there was that running fight from Ombersley into the suburbs of the city, and then through into the city itself, which was several days ago now. And obviously that is the bridge across the River Severn at Worcester, one of the main bridges really. So that still remains open. So if Charles needed to, he could traditionally withdraw his entire army over that bridge and into Herefordshire, and then hopefully escape into Wales. And technically Wales is the place where traditionally royalists have come from. It's why the river bridge at Worcester was so important. But then if you went across to the eastern side, you're then starting to move into countryside and lots of little villages. Now as we come down, there's quite a few things to look out for, because not only do we have the River Severn flowing north to south, we also have the River Team moving from left to right. So that comes into the River Severn in the area of Powick village, and there is a small bridge there. We also know that the Scots were going to use that as an outpost. So what they ended up doing is they actually set to work from today dismantling the arches of that bridge as well, only to stop Parliament from crossing over, which would keep the escape route of Charles, if he wanted to, being to the west and not to the east really. And then towards the bottom of this map, we've also got another river that snakes through, and this is actually the River Avon, and it snakes through Evesham, where there's a bridging point, Pershore, and then it continues down towards Tewkesbury, which is off the map. And then something that you can see at the very bottom of my map is Upton upon Severn, which is actually a bridging point across the River Severn to the west, so towards Wales basically. So what was going on 369 years ago? Well, Parliament's dismantled this bridge, and there was a reason for that. Cromwell has ordered it to be dismantled to prevent the Scots from retreating north, so to stop the Scots from going back to Scotland. Evesham was now in the hands of Oliver Cromwell. We know on the 27th of August Oliver Cromwell was there in Evesham, and bear in mind it's only a small little market town, or even a little village at the time, and you have to remember Cromwell had brought 30,000 men into the fields and into the buildings and the pubs of Evesham. That was an absolutely massive army, and that was key, because from there Cromwell could command the east, and that was important because the Scots could therefore not retreat north, the Scots could therefore not go east, and because Evesham is to the south on this snaking River Avon and the Severn plus the Team, it also meant Cromwell had control of the south. So technically the Royalist army is cut off from the north, east and the south. There is only one way that the Royalists can go, and that is to escape to the west into Wales. Now Charles had technically 4 options open for him on the 27th of August 1651. The first one was maybe to cross onto the west bank, cross at Powick Bridge and race down to London in a roundabout sort of way. Wouldn't be the best move to take, to be fair, but at the end of the day the Royalists have the City Bridge and also Powick Bridge, so it's doable basically. The second option Charles had would be to escape Worcester itself and head to Wales, as I mentioned before. So that's another doable option, and maybe fight a guerrilla war across there. Third option would be to completely barricade himself into Worcester and wait for Cromwell to lay siege upon Worcester. And both armies, Parliament and the Royalists, had equipment to be able to do that. Or the fourth option was to have an open battle somewhere around the city of Worcester, the most favourable being the River Plains over to the west and also to the south. So we would like you to comment, what option should have Charles had gone for? Should he had carried on down to London, because technically he's being encircled here at Worcester? Should he have escaped into Wales? Or should he have allowed the city to barricade itself, shut itself down and prepare for siege? Or was he right, because I'm going to spoil the story, was he right to have fought an open battle on the 3rd of September? Anyway, that's been a brief update of what was going on in Worcester at this time. Bear in mind, Cromwell needs to have both sides of the River Severn. So at some point, Cromwell will have to probe his way forward and maybe take the crossing at Upton, Powick, or somewhere else within the county. Cromwell needs to be able to prevent Charles from escaping Wales if he wants to end the Civil War completely on the 3rd of September. Anyway, on that note, make sure you let us know what option he would have chosen from those four, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.